Camille Hart was a woman who turned silence into spectacle. At 55, she stood at the helm of the most prestigious luxury events firm on the planet, Hart and Company. Every president, heiress, and mogul who wanted their life's moments to feel like dreams called her. She never had to chase anyone. She walked into rooms like thunder in silk, commanding, sharp-eyed, unbothered. The world applauded her strength, envied her discipline, but no one ever saw the soft ache beneath the armor. No one had been allowed to, not in years. Love? That was a game she stopped playing after too many heartbreaks. One in particular, her first love, long buried in Seoul, wrapped in the voice of a man who once said he'd stay, never fully let go. Junho was the first time she believed in forever, and also the reason she stopped. A heartbreak she never truly recovered from. So Camille gave her heart to the only thing that wouldn't leave, her work, which is why, when a young Korean tech CEO demanded her personal attention for an extravagant gala, her first instinct was to say no. His name was Seo Min-jun, 35, CEO of Lightcore, the fastest-growing AI and biotech company in Asia. Magazine covers called him the golden mind of Seoul. He was far too handsome for his own good, with intense, thoughtful eyes that didn't match his age, and a low, deliberate way of speaking that made it impossible to dismiss him as just another arrogant billionaire. The moment the plane touched down at Incheon International Airport, Camille Hart felt her lungs tighten. Not from altitude, but from memory. She'd spent 30 years building a world that didn't include this place. 3 decades perfecting a legacy, globe-trotting through luxury, hosting royalty, designing moments that could silence entire rooms. She'd become a legend, Camille Hart, whispered about in fashion circles, profiled in Forbes, worshipped in whispers, and yet the first thing she felt stepping off the plane wasn't triumph. It was dread. Her heels clicked softly as she stepped into the terminal, tailored black coat flowing behind her like a shadow she couldn't outrun. She wore dark sunglasses, though the fluorescent lights above didn't call for them. Her assistant trailed behind, carrying their itinerary and luggage, oblivious to the quiet battle unraveling inside her chest. "You don't owe this country anything anymore," she told herself. "You're just here to do your job." But Seoul didn't care about her logic. The air hit different here, thinner, tighter, the kind that clung to your ribs and made you remember everything you thought you'd buried. By the time they reached the waiting car, Camille's grip on the door handle was stiff. "You okay, ma'am?" her assistant asked. Camille nodded once, lips drawn tight. "Fine." The skyline had changed. Glass and chrome rose from the ground like ambition on steroids. LED screens shimmered across buildings, advertising K-pop concerts, skincare empires, and political campaigns. Seoul was electric now. Fast, unapologetic, global. But Camille didn't see any of that. She saw the alley where Junho first held her hand. She saw the Hanok village where they'd snuck away in the rain. She saw the tear-soaked pavement outside the embassy where she'd stood at 20, suitcase in hand, begging herself not to cry before her flight home. January 15th, a day she never forgot. Her throat tightened. Even now, after all these years, the betrayal hadn't unstitched itself. It still lived in her bones. By the time she arrived at the hotel, the sun had begun to sink behind the towers. The concierge greeted her like royalty. Her suite overlooked the Han River, all glass and light, every surface gleaming with money. But Camille stood at the window and didn't move. Her reflection stared back at her. Older now, yes, but still beautiful, still regal, still impossible to ignore. And yet, so tired. There was a knock at the door. She turned. A staff member stepped inside and bowed. A package for Ms. Hart. She took it with a polite nod and waited until the door closed before opening it. Inside was a thin leather folder with the Lightcore logo pressed into the front in silver. She opened it. Inside, a personalized welcome letter, the itinerary, gala expectations, vendor contact sheets, and then, tucked into the back, a simple note card on heavier stationery. Ms. Hart, we are honored to have you in Seoul. I look forward to collaborating with you in person. SEO Minjun, CEO. The name hit her like a slap. She froze. SEO. Her fingers curled around the paper, breath stalling. The name was common enough in Korea, but in her gut, in that secret place that had been locked since her 20s, she knew. She pressed the card to the table and took a long, unsteady breath. It's not him, she whispered aloud. It's not the same family. Let it go, Camille. But the tremor in her hand told her otherwise. That night, sleep refused to come. She walked the streets alone, pulling her coat tighter around her. Her heels tapped against pavement that remembered her before the world did. She passed shops that didn't exist before, but when she rounded a certain corner, the past caught up with her. There it was, the tiny tea house, still standing, still hidden, where he used to meet her when no one else could know. Her feet stopped. She stared at it through the glass, breath fogging in the cold. Inside, a young couple laughed quietly over porcelain cups. No idea who had once sat in their place. No idea how much love and pain still lingered in that corner. Camille turned away before the memories could drag her under. By morning, she was ready. Hair slicked back, eyes sharp, a fitted gray pantsuit that made the hotel staff stare when she passed. She walked into the Lightcore headquarters like a woman unshaken, like she hadn't cried in the bathtub the night before, like she wasn't standing in the same country that once sent her home empty. She was ushered up 37 floors in silence, and when the doors finally opened, there he was, Seo Minjun, tall, impeccably dressed in black. Young, but not green. His eyes were too still for that, too watchful. And when those eyes landed on her, they lit with something she didn't expect. Recognition, number, just curiosity. Ms. Hart, he said, bowing slightly. An honor. Camille forced a smile. Let's get to work. But inside, the ground was already shifting beneath her, because something in his voice was achingly familiar, and she knew without needing to ask. The past hadn't just followed her back, it had opened the door and was waiting. Camille hadn't expected him to be beautiful. She had prepared herself for arrogance, for the slick, overconfident smile of a young man who had inherited a kingdom and knew it. But as Seo Minjun rose from his seat at the head of the boardroom table, she faltered for a second longer than she meant to. He stood tall, graceful in movement, not stiff, not performative. Jet black hair fell across his brow, eyes steady, framed by lashes far too long for someone with that much authority. He wore a slim black suit, no tie, and a watch that looked old, worn, like a gift, not a purchase. And when he smiled, it wasn't cocky, it was quietly disarming. Ms. Hart, he said, his voice low and even, bowing just slightly. I've admired your work for years. Thank you for coming. Camille gave a slight nod, keeping her expression neutral. You made it difficult to say no. His lips curved, barely. You'll learn I have a habit of doing that. She met his eyes. I don't respond well to habits, especially not in men. He didn't flinch. He didn't smirk. He just tilted his head, as if genuinely curious. Duly noted. The meeting began without fanfare. Minjun led with efficiency. He outlined the gala's vision, his expectations, the story he wanted the evening to tell. His voice never rose. He never interrupted. And when Camille spoke, When she challenged something, pushed back, offered a better solution, he didn't bristle. He listened. That was the first thing that shook her. Most men, especially in this country, especially at his level, expected women like her to compromise, especially women who looked like her. But Min Jun didn't patronize her. He didn't soften his voice like he thought she'd break. He didn't talk over her. He watched her, like he was learning her, not managing her. It made her feel visible, and that was dangerous. When the meeting ended, the others filtered out, bowing respectfully. Camille gathered her tablet and notes, careful not to look at him again. But as she turned to leave, his voice stopped her. "Ms. Hart?" She paused. "Yes?" He walked around the table and stopped a few feet in front of her. "I'm aware this project is personal for us both," he said quietly. She raised a brow. "Is that so?" "You've built your legacy in cities that look nothing like Seoul," he said, "and yet you chose to come back." Camille's face didn't change, but her heart knocked once against her ribs. "And you're 35, she replied, "barely old enough to remember the Seoul I left." A pause, then softly, "I've studied its history, the visible one and the hidden one." There it was again, that stillness in his voice, like he was speaking not just to her resume, but to her soul. Camille blinked. "You've done your homework." "I've followed your work for 10 years, he said simply, "and I brought you here for more than your name." Her brow lifted again, but he continued before she could respond. "You build experiences," he said, "not events. You know how to make a room feel like memory. That's what I need." Camille exhaled slowly. "Flattery won't win me over, Mr. SEO." "I wasn't trying to win," he replied, "only to be honest." For a second, they stood in silence. Then Camille turned, sharp and graceful. "I'll send a full proposal by Monday. You'll get it when it's ready." She stepped out of the room before she could look back. That night, Camille sat on the edge of her hotel bed, heels kicked off, notes untouched. She was restless, frustrated, and worse, intrigued. Seo Min Jun. There was something about him, something wrong, or maybe too right. He reminded her of someone, and yet he didn't. He felt familiar and foreign in the same breath. And that look in his eyes, the way he regarded her, like she was someone worth studying, not someone to use or tame, it unnerved her. She had sworn she wouldn't let herself get distracted. Not in Korea, not again. But when she closed her eyes that night, she didn't dream of the man who left her. She dreamed of the man who had just arrived. The days turned into weeks, and Seoul moved around them like a film on mute, busy, glittering, loud only from a distance. Inside the four walls of collaboration, Camille and Min Jun existed in a rhythm that neither of them had prepared for. They worked side by side, planning layouts, tasting menus, touring rooftop gardens, and architectural showrooms. But it wasn't the work that made time bend. It was the spaces between it. The moments when Camille would glance up from a mood board and catch Min Jun already watching her. The times he'd pass her tea without asking how she liked it, because he already knew. The pauses, the silences, the almosts. One night, they stayed late finalizing the gala's lighting scheme. The conference room was dim, a single lamp casting soft gold over swatches of fabric and crystal tableware samples. Camille stretched her arms above her head, stifling a yawn. "Sorry," she muttered. "I'm too old for these late nights." Min Jun glanced up from his notes. "You don't look tired." "Don't flatter me." "I'm not." His eyes met hers. "You look centered, like the world can't shake you." Camille raised a brow. "And that's your idea of a compliment?" "It's my idea of awe." Her breath caught. She looked away, too quickly. Careful, Mr. SEO. You'll ruin your polished reputation. I'm not interested in being polished, he said quietly. I'm interested in being honest. He didn't care about the age gap. He didn't care that she tried to act above him. In fact, he loved that she terrified most people. He loved that she didn't apologize for her power. But what took him under, what rooted him deeper, was how Camille made him feel peaceful, not passive, but anchored. And Camille? She tried every trick she knew to stay out of love. There were 20 years between them. The world would have opinions. She had opinions. But Minjun made her feel like a woman again, not an icon, not a legend, not a name on a guest list. A woman, worth loving, worth waiting for. Another night, during a rooftop site visit, the wind picked up. Camille shivered and turned to say something, only to find Minjun already slipping off his coat. She started to protest. That's not necessary. He draped it over her shoulders anyway. It is. Their eyes locked. Neither of them moved. I'm not cold, she lied. I know, he murmured, but you carry too much alone. Just let someone offer something for once. She held his gaze for a long moment. Then, to her own surprise, she didn't give the coat back. Camille tried to shake it off. She called her best friend Alana one night, voice low and cautious. I think he likes me, she said. There was silence on the other end. Then a dry, amused sigh. Oh, you think? I'm serious. So am I. The man is obsessed with you. You act like this is shocking. He's 35, Camille snapped. And? I'm old enough to be his mother. You're not. And even if you were, I've seen the way you light up when you talk about him. This isn't about age, Cam. It's about fear. Camille swallowed hard. Alana's voice softened. You don't have to outrun your past anymore. You're allowed to let someone love you. Even here. Even now. Camille didn't respond. But later that night, she stood at her hotel window. The city sprawled beneath her like a memory she never asked to return. Lights blinked in glass towers. Neon buzzed like it knew her secrets. She hadn't felt this exposed in decades, not even when she was 20, bleeding quietly from the heartbreak she never dared name. But this wasn't that. This man wasn't reaching for her to take something. He was waiting, with open hands, with patience. She didn't know how to trust. And when she finally let herself feel it, all of it, the longing, the fear, the unbearable hope she thought she'd outgrown, it didn't feel like surrender. It felt like choosing herself, maybe for the first time in her life. Their first kiss didn't come in a whirlwind. It came in the quiet. It was a rare day off. The event planning was nearly complete. Minjun invited her to a private hanok just outside the city, a restored house tucked between trees, built for silence and sun. Camille had hesitated, then said yes. They drank plum tea on the porch. She wore a cream-colored dress. He wore rolled sleeves and no shoes, hair unstyled, like the version of himself no one else got to see. She had laughed at one of his terrible jokes, a real laugh, one from the gut, the kind that surprised her. And then he just looked at her, not like a man looking at a woman, like a man seeing his beginning. I don't care what the world thinks of this, he said softly, voice steady. Camille's smile faded into something more vulnerable. Even if it ruins your image? He shook his head. My image is nothing compared to what you've already survived. She froze. I'm scared to love you, she said, voice trembling. But I already do. Minjun reached across and gently took her hand. Then stop running, he whispered. I'm right here. No shadows, no lies. And then, slowly, finally, she reached out and touched his face. Her fingers brushed along his jaw, tentative but certain. He leaned into her touch like a prayer. And when their lips met, it wasn't fiery or rushed. It was reverent, like a promise sealed in silence, like two storms exhaling. Later, as they sat together in the fading light, Minjun pulled her close and whispered into her hair, "I've waited my whole life to feel this sure about something." Camille closed her eyes. For the first time in 35 years, the country that once broke her felt like home. And just like that, their relationship began. Camille never meant to go into his study. She had only wandered in because he was still on the phone, barefoot in the kitchen, laughing with one of his investors. She had smiled at the sound. Minjun rarely laughed like that in meetings, but with her, he was soft, unguarded. She had only stepped away to give him space. She had a glass of wine in her hand and the delicate ache of contentment warming her chest, until she saw it. A simple silver frame, perched on a side shelf, tucked between two thick leather-bound books, probably unread but too expensive not to display. She didn't notice it at first. It wasn't ostentatious. The frame didn't call attention to itself, but the face inside did. Camille froze. Her hand dropped slowly, the wine glass tilting, forgotten. There he was, Seo Junho, younger than she remembered, his jaw still sharp, his hair untouched by gray. He stood in a crisp suit, one hand resting on the shoulder of a child, a boy who would one day become the man in her bed. Minjun. And beside him, a woman, beautiful, Korean, polished. His wife? Camille's fingers trembled as she picked up the frame, heart pounding so loud she couldn't hear the distant hum of Minjun's voice in the other room anymore. "No," she whispered. "No, it can't be." But it was. She would know that face in her sleep, would know the way his lips curled when he laughed, the exact shape of his eyes when he looked at her like she was his whole world. Seo Junho, the man who had promised her forever and left her with nothing. A wave of dizziness hit her. She sat down hard on the edge of the desk, the frame still clutched in her hand. Suddenly the room shrank. The walls inched closer. The floor felt uneven beneath her heels. Her breath came in shallow gasps, and she dug her nails into her palm, trying to steady herself. Don't cry. Not here. Not again. She hadn't cried for Junho in years, hadn't spoken his name aloud, had built an empire over the ruins he left behind. And now his legacy had been kissing her, holding her, promising her something new. "Camille?" Minjun's voice drifted into the study, easy, casual. She startled. "Camille!" he called again, closer now. She jumped to her feet and shoved the frame back onto the shelf, her fingers trembling so badly it knocked against the wood. She looked around, wild, panicked. Her heart was thundering. Her eyes were wet. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't let him see her like this. She couldn't tell him what she just found. Not yet. Not like this. When he stepped into the room seconds later, Camille was already halfway to the front door, coat in hand, hair disheveled. "Hey, wait!" Minjun caught up to her. "Where are you going? What happened?" "I have to go," she said quickly, not looking him in the eye. "Camille, wait." "I said I have to go." Her voice was sharp, shaken. Her hand was already on the handle. He moved in front of her, brows drawn. "Tell me what's wrong." "I'm fine," she said. "You're not." Her eyes met his then, and he stopped. There was something raw in her expression. Not anger, not confusion. Pain. Pain so old and buried, it didn't belong to the woman he knew. "I'll call you later," she whispered. And then she slipped out the door before he could stop her. The elevator ride down was a blur. The street outside Seoul Tower felt colder than usual. The lights, the noise, the people, none of it registered. Camille walked until her feet ached, until her tears came in quiet, unstoppable waves. How cruel the universe could be. To send her a man who made her believe again, only to find out he was the son of the man who had taught her not to. Camille didn't answer his calls. Not the first day, not the second, not even after the fourth message he left. Voice low, confused, gently pleading. Camille, please, if I did something, if you're hurting, just let me in. I'm not asking for perfect. I'm just asking for you. She listened to them all in silence. Her phone trembled in her hand, but she never replied. She didn't know how to. How could she explain that the very thing he came from was the wound she never fully closed? How could she look into those eyes again, eyes that reminded her so much of him now, and say, I loved your father, once, before the world taught me not to? On the sixth day, Min-jun showed up. No text, no warning, just knocked on the door of her hotel suite, rain clinging to his coat, hair falling across his forehead. Camille opened the door and froze. His eyes searched hers, not angry, just aching. You've been avoiding me, he said quietly. She stepped back but didn't let him in. I needed space. Did I do something wrong? He asked. Was it something I said? Something I missed? She looked away. It's not about you. I think it is. She took a slow breath. You don't want to know the truth, Min-jun. He stepped forward. I do. You think you do, she said, her voice cracking. But once I tell you, everything will change. Then let it change, he said, firm now, because I'm already drowning, Camille. And I'd rather drown in truth than be left gasping in silence. She turned from him then, hand trembling as she pressed it to her forehead. She didn't want to say it. She didn't want to relive it. But his voice was too steady, too sure. I found the photo, she whispered finally. He blinked. What? In your study, the family photo. He said nothing. I saw him, she went on. Your father. Now his face changed. A slight stiffening in the jaw. A wrinkle between his brows. Camille swallowed hard. I was in love with him, she said. A very long time ago. The silence that followed was deafening. Min-jun didn't speak, didn't breathe. Camille stared at the floor, her voice barely audible now. He told me he'd fight for me. He said he'd face his family, the press, the company, everything. He said I was worth it. Min-jun's throat worked as he struggled to speak. And then he disappeared, she whispered. A week later, I read about his engagement in the papers. No call, no explanation, just gone. Min-jun took a step back. Camille looked up. I never slept with him, she added quickly. It never got that far, but the love was real. And when he left, it shattered something in me. His voice was low and rough when he finally spoke. Why didn't you tell me? When you found out at my place? She looked away. Because I didn't want to see him in you, she said quietly. I didn't want you burdened with the sins of the man who left me behind. He closed his eyes. And when he opened them again, something in his face had changed. That night, Min-jun drove to the Seoul estate. It was pouring by the time he arrived, and he didn't wait for the valet or the umbrella. He stormed into the main hall, soaked to the bone, anger simmering behind his ribs. He found his father in the sitting room, reading the paper like the world wasn't crumbling. Why didn't you tell me about Camille Hart? Min-jun asked without preamble. Junho looked up, startled. Then slowly, something like recognition spread across his face. I didn't know you knew her, he said. But you knew who she was, Min-jun snapped. You knew what she meant to you, and you said nothing. Junho set down his paper. I didn't know how. That's not good enough. His father sighed, suddenly looking years older. Min Jun, some ghosts don't leave just because you bury them. No, they find their way into your son's life and break his heart for you. Junho's eyes darkened. You love her. Min Jun didn't hesitate. I do. Junho looked down at his hands. I did too. Min Jun's fists clenched. Then why didn't you fight for her? His father's voice was quiet. Because I was weak. Because I was young. Because I was terrified of losing everything I was raised to protect. Min Jun stared at him. So you chose your legacy. Junho met his eyes and lost my soul. Meanwhile, Camille stood at her window, watching the rain fall. She had no idea what Min Jun was doing now. She hadn't known who his father was, not at first, but the moment she saw that photo, she knew. And still, she left without a word. That was what haunted her. Not the love, the silence. It was the weight of hurting someone she never meant to break. And yet, for the first time in decades, the old wound didn't open to destroy her. It opened to let her breathe. She couldn't sleep. The city outside her window pulsed with noise and neon, but inside, Camille was drowning in silence. The storm didn't ease inside her. It grew. There was one more thing left to face. Not for him, not for closure, for herself. The next morning, she made a quiet call to an old industry contact, someone who owed her a favor. Within an hour, she had the address. The CEO Junho still lived just outside Gangnam, in a gated estate that hadn't changed much since the 90s. She recognized the pillars, the curve of the road, the ache in her chest. She didn't rehearse what she'd say. She just went. Camille walked through the gate like she wasn't sure her legs would keep carrying her. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, but from fury held too long beneath her skin. A butler opened the door, startled. I need to speak with Seo Junho. He hesitated, but something in her voice must have made space for no answer, but yes. A few minutes later, Junho stepped into the sunlit entryway, wearing a crisp house shirt, barefoot. He stopped when he saw her. His eyes widened. His mouth parted. Camille. I don't want tea, she said flatly. I don't want apologies. He blinked, stunned, silent. You disappeared, she continued. Her voice shook. 35 years ago. You let me think I mattered. You told me you'd fight. Then I found out about your engagement in the paper. I didn't even get a goodbye. He looked down. I thought I was protecting you. Don't, she snapped. You weren't protecting me. You were preserving yourself. You made me feel like love was dangerous, like I was. His face creased. I thought letting go would keep you safe. Camille stepped forward. Her voice trembled, not with weakness, but rage restrained. You didn't just let go. You erased me. And now, here I am, standing in front of your son, falling in love with him, and he doesn't even know who you used to be. Junho opened his mouth. No sound came out. You don't get to rewrite history, she said, stepping back. But I will, starting today. And with that, she left him in the doorway, alone, and finally facing what it meant to be forgotten. Min Jun didn't sleep after confronting his father. Rain clinging to his skin like ghosts, his heart too full to collapse. He walked straight into his father's old study, the one no one entered anymore, the one filled with silence and scent and dust. He didn't know what he was looking for. Answers, maybe? Or just something real in the middle of all the betrayal. The room smelled of cedar and old regrets. On the far shelf, tucked behind a stack of foreign books and forgotten ledgers, he found it. A journal. Black leather. Unlabeled. He opened it with fingers that shook. Inside were neat lines of Korean script. Calm, ordered, his father's hand. Minjun scanned page after page. Nothing unusual. Notes on business, on stocks, on meetings. And then he saw her name. Camille. He sat down. I met her in the rain, of all places. She laughed when I slipped on the stone path. I was annoyed. She wasn't. She was fearless, curious, a foreigner, yes, but not lost. She made me question everything. They told me I'd ruin my future if I stayed with her. But I think I ruined something far more precious by letting her go. Camille was never mine to keep. But I should have fought for her anyway. Minjun closed the journal and pressed it to his chest. She hadn't been a fling. She'd been a turning point. And somehow, fate had led her back. Not to repeat history, but to rewrite it. He found her 2 days later. She was walking alone through a quiet courtyard behind her hotel, dressed in a long cream coat, the air cool and crisp around her. She hadn't noticed him yet. She looked quieter, as if carrying herself required more effort now. Minjun didn't call out. He walked toward her slowly, like approaching something sacred. She turned when she heard his footsteps. Their eyes met. Camille's lips parted. Her breath caught. She looked like she might run, but she didn't. I read it, Minjun said softly. His journal. Camille didn't respond. He stepped closer. He loved you. Her eyes watered. That doesn't make it better. I know. She folded her arms tightly. I keep trying to forget how much I loved him. And then I see you. And I'm not him, Minjun said gently. I know that, she snapped, voice trembling. But how do I separate the two of you when your eyes are the same? When your laugh is the same? When your hands touch me and I remember how his didn't? Minjun stood still, letting her unravel. You make me feel safe, she whispered. You make me feel alive. And that terrifies me, Minjun. Because what if this is just repeating what happened before? He didn't move, didn't argue, didn't try to fix it. He just stepped forward and said the one thing that lived like truth in his chest. I didn't know our love had history behind it, but I know this. What we have now is real, and I want to build a future that doesn't look like the past. Camille's breath caught. I don't want to inherit anyone's mistakes, he said. I want to build something new, with you. Not because of who you were to him, but because of who you are to me. She stared at him. Tears slipped down her cheeks. Not angry, not broken, just true. And when she stepped into his arms, she wasn't certain. She was brave. They stood in the stillness of the courtyard as the breeze whispered through the trees, and for the first time in weeks, in years, in decades, Camille Hart let herself believe she could love again, not as someone else's echo, but as her own beginning. They didn't announce it. There was no press release, no curated debut, no soft introduction to the world. They simply walked in, together, hand in hand, Camille Hart, the black woman the country had once tried to ignore, and Seo Minjun, the heir to a legacy that had once cost her everything. The gala wasn't just the culmination of weeks of work. It was a reckoning. She wore a floor-length indigo gown, smooth silk against skin. The spotlight now had no choice but to celebrate. Her hair was coiled into a crown. Her walk was not just elegant, it was deliberate. Minjun stood beside her in a tailored suit, expression unreadable, hand resting gently at the small of her back. Not possessive, not performative, just present. And when the first whispers rippled through the crowd, Camille didn't flinch. Let them talk. She had already survived louder things than their mouths. Later that evening, a well-known CEO from another firm approached with a smirk too polished to be polite. "So," he said to Minjun, eyes flicking to Camille, "you've brought your consultant as your date?" Minjun didn't miss a beat. "No," he said. "I brought the woman I love." Camille raised an eyebrow but said nothing. The man blinked, then chuckled awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable. Minjun turned fully to Camille then, ignoring everyone else. "You good?" he asked softly. She nodded once. "Always." And just like that, they moved past him. They spent most of the evening working the event, checking lighting cues, making sure catering was precise, seating dignitaries, but people watched them like they were the show. An age gap the world couldn't ignore. A love that defied the math of what made sense to anyone but them. A cross-cultural scandal. A connection that refused to apologize for existing. But they didn't owe anyone understanding. Camille had once let fear chase her from the city. She would never run again. That night, they walked through Cheonggyecheon Stream, far from the flashbulbs and crystal chandeliers. The path was quiet, the sound of water trickling between stones, street lamps flickering like constellations. Camille pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. The wind had teeth tonight. Minjun glanced at her, his voice low. "You don't have to do this. You don't have to let the world tear you apart again." She exhaled slowly, then met his eyes. "I'm not doing this for the world. Let them whisper if they want. So what if I loved a man younger than me, who just happens to be the son of the one who broke my heart?" He looked at her, startled by the quiet certainty in her voice. Then, "For me?" She shook her head, steady. "For me." She stopped walking. He did too. She held his gaze for a moment longer, then spoke, her voice soft but steady. "For most of my life, I thought love was a battlefield, something to endure, something that asked me to shrink just to be held. I believed if it didn't hurt, it couldn't be real." She looked up at him, eyes shining. "But you made me feel like I could expand, like I didn't have to trade pieces of myself just to be loved. You didn't try to save me. You stood beside me." "I will always stand beside you," he said quietly. "I know," she whispered. They walked on, slowly, quietly, and at one point, she reached for his hand, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Headlines ranged from Chaebol air-linked to father's long-buried love, to from forbidden past to public passion. Chaebol's son rewrites his father's history with the same woman. History repeats in the arms of his father's first love, but Camille didn't flinch. She read one aloud while sipping her morning tea. Minjun looked up from his phone. "Want me to sue them?" She smirked. "Let them have their drama. We have something better." He raised a brow. "What's that?" She leaned in, kissed his cheek, and whispered, "Peace." And maybe that was what love really was in the end. Not perfection, not validation, not the absence of pain, but peace, found in the arms of someone who chose you, even after knowing everything. Minjun had barely stepped into the foyer when he heard the rustle of movement from the family parlor. "Come in," his mother called before he could say a word. Her voice was calm, too calm. She was seated near the window, dressed immaculately, her teacup untouched on the lacquered table. The room smelled faintly of gardenias. She didn't look up when he entered. "You've made your choice," she said, her tone flat. "Yes," he replied, unblinking. His mother finally raised her eyes to meet his, cold, measured. "She's 20 years older than you." "I'm aware. She was your father's what?" Her mouth tightened. "Mistake?" "She was never his mistake," Minjun said evenly. "She was his regret, and she's the best decision I've ever made." His mother's jaw clenched. Do you think people will accept this? She asked. You walking around Seoul with a woman who... Say it, he said. Say what you're really afraid of. His mother's eyes flashed. She's not Korean. She's not young. She's not the image we built. You are the face of this family now, and people will talk. They already are. Then stop giving them a reason to, she snapped. Minjun took a step closer, voice quiet but unwavering. Do you think I care what people say when I finally feel like I can breathe? When I'm with someone who sees all of me and doesn't flinch? She's old enough to be... She's not, he cut in. She's not my mother. She's not some shadow from my father's past. She's Camille, and I love her. His mother looked away, lips trembling just slightly. Are you doing this to spite him? She asked. To rewrite his story? Minjun's voice softened, but only barely. I'm doing this because I refuse to live a life that's built on silence and shame. That's what you and Appa chose. I won't. She blinked at that, stunned by the word shame. Your father did what he had to, she said quietly. No, he replied. He did what was easy. There was a long silence. For a moment, the years between them felt unbearably loud. Then his mother looked down at her teacup again and said, without looking up, then go. Love her. But don't ask me to clap for it. I'm not, Minjun said. I'm asking you not to stand in the way. He walked out without waiting for a reply. A few days after that, a message arrived at Camille's hotel. No signature, just a simple line, handwritten in elegant Hangul. Tea if you're willing. 1 hour. Hanak Tea Room, Bukchon. She recognized the address. She arrived early. The tea room was small, traditional, sunlit through paper windows. There was no staff in sight, just a lacquered table, a pot of tea already steeping, and Seo Hyejin, seated in perfect silence. Minjun's mother did not rise when Camille entered. She simply gestured to the seat across from her. Camille sat. They poured their tea in silence, as if this moment was part ritual, part test. Hyejin studied her carefully, not with cruelty, but with the caution of a woman who had survived her own heartbreaks. You haven't aged the way I expected, she said finally. Camille didn't smile. Neither have you. They sipped again. A long pause. Then, in a voice so low it nearly didn't reach the table, Minjun's mother said, He never spoke your name, not once in all these years, but I knew. I knew there was someone he never let go of, even when he thought he had. Camille blinked. There was no venom in the words, just exhaustion, and maybe, beneath it, something that almost resembled respect. I didn't come back to take anything, Camille said quietly. Not from him, not from you. I know, Hyejin replied, but you still came back. Camille nodded once. For myself. Another pause. Then, he's stubborn, Minjun. More like you than either of us, I think. That made Camille almost laugh. Almost. He chose you, Hyejin said, setting down her cup. I won't pretend I understand it. I won't pretend I'm entirely at peace with it. She looked Camille dead in the eye. But I see how he looks at you. Camille swallowed. Hyejin stood. I don't need to approve, but I won't stand in your way. And with that, she bowed, just slightly, and left the tea room, leaving Camille alone with the fading warmth of tea and the tremble of something unspoken. She sat for a long time afterward, hands wrapped around her cup. Not forgiven, not forgotten, just acknowledged. And for a woman who had once disappeared from this country without a trace, that was more than she ever expected. It was peace. They had finished dinner under the lanterns, soft light swaying above them, their plates cleared but their wine still full. The garden buzzed faintly with the hush of insects and the warm hum of summer air settling over the trees. Minjun watched Camille as she leaned back in her chair, barefoot, her face caught in the glow of the lanterns, her smile lazy and soft. "I used to think forever was a myth," she said, swirling the wine in her glass, a word made up to sell rings and lullabies. He didn't respond right away. He was watching her the way he always did, like she was something he never got used to holding. "Is it still a myth?" he asked quietly. Camille turned to look at him, her brow arched slightly. "You tell me." He reached into his pocket. Her breath caught the moment she saw his hand tremble. He didn't get on one knee, didn't make a speech. That wasn't them. He just pulled out a small box, simple, smooth wood, and set it on the table between them. "I know what people will say," he said, "about age, about legacy, about headlines." Camille stared at him, her chest tight. He opened the box. Inside was a ring unlike any she'd ever seen. No diamond, no gold, just a smooth band of dark stone, carved with a tiny camellia flower. Her flower. "I don't want a perfect story," Minjun said, voice steady. "I want this one. Ours." Camille didn't move. She couldn't. Her hands trembled in her lap. "I'm not asking you to be anything you're not," he added. "I'm not asking you to belong to me. I'm just asking if I can keep choosing you, every day, as long as you'll let me." Silence stretched between them, full and electric. Then slowly, so slowly, she reached forward and closed the box with her fingers, her eyes full of tears. "You already know my answer," she whispered. "I want to hear it anyway." Camille swallowed hard, then said it softly, like it was the most honest thing she'd ever spoken. "Yes." Minjun leaned forward, forehead against hers, their hands tangled between the wine glasses and the shadows. And neither of them said anything more. They didn't have to. 6 years later, spring arrived softly that year, like it had made a promise not to rush her. The house sat just outside of Seoul, tucked between rolling hills and winding roads, far enough from the noise but close enough for the world to still remember them. A Hanok-style home, restored and warmed with time, with black stone pathways and a garden that never stopped growing. Camille Hart-Seo knelt in the garden that morning, her knees in the dirt, sleeves pushed past her elbows. Her hands, once used to velvet linens and champagne flutes, now moved through soil like she was coaxing something sacred to rise. Hydrangeas, wisteria, lavender, and white lilies. Everything she planted, she kept. The wind tugged gently at her curls, now silver at the temples. But her posture, still strong, still graceful, still hers. Behind her, the sliding door creaked open. "I made too much toast again," Minjun said, barefoot, holding a tray. "I blame the bread for being delicious." Camille smiled without turning. "You blame the bread every week, and yet I keep doing it." She stood slowly, brushing her palms on her apron, then walked to meet him. He was wearing one of her old sweaters. It hung off his frame slightly, stretched from too many washes, sleeves pulled over his hands. His hair was a little longer these days. He was 41 now. She was 61, and somehow, they'd never been more in sync. They ate on the porch, cross-legged, sunlight spilling across the wooden panels. He read from the worn journal on the table, her latest collection. She hadn't published it, didn't need to. It was just for them. "I no longer need love to rescue me, only to rest beside me, while I grow." Minjun's voice softened as he read. "She's good," he said. "She is," Camille replied, sipping her tea. "She's tired, but she's good." He looked up. "You're not tired. You're wise." Camille gave him a look. Wise is what people call you when you stop caring about wearing heels. He chuckled. You wore heels last week. She grinned. Exactly. Later, a young journalist visits to interview Camille about her legacy. Before she leaves, she asks, what advice would you give your younger self? Camille smiles and replies, stop waiting to be chosen. Choose yourself. Everything else follows. Later that afternoon, they lay on the floor of their reading room, heads on opposite ends of a shared pillow. The window was open. Birds sang outside. The peace was thick, whole, lived in. Camille reached for his hand. You never asked me to become anyone else, she said quietly, not even when I tried to run. Minjun turned his head toward her, eyes soft. I didn't want a fantasy, he said. I wanted you. The past still existed. Sometimes it spoke in headlines they didn't click. Sometimes it showed up in his father's voice on the phone. Older now, quieter. Sometimes it pressed against her when she walked through Seoul and caught someone staring too long, as if trying to remember where they'd seen her before. But none of it defined them anymore. They didn't live to prove anything. They lived to breathe. To wake up and know that they'd chosen this, fully, openly, fiercely, when the world told them it was impossible. And that was the most radical love of all. In the evening, Camille stood in the garden again, barefoot this time, her fingers grazing the new buds. Behind her, Minjun was setting up lanterns for dinner. Light filtered through the trees. Their shadows stretched long across the grass, blending into one. Minjun, she called softly. He looked up. She turned toward him, a little overwhelmed by the moment, by how simple it was, how hard-earned. I'm happy. He paused, then he smiled. The smile he gave, only her. Good, he said. Now you're just showing off. And maybe she was. But after everything they'd lived through, everything they refused to surrender to, Camille Hart had earned the right to bloom, out loud and in love. The end.